Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Number 10. Pompeii. Believe it or not, the Italian military was responsible for the first major study of one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world. The ancient Roman ruins of Pompeii may have been discovered in the 16th century, but the first real studies weren't carried out until the middle of the 18th century. Between 1750 and 1764, military engineer Carl Weber completed extensive investigations and excavations of the site. The issue is that Carl wasn't a real archaeologist. He was paid by Don Carlos, King of Naples, to carry out his systematic studies. With the king's patronage, Carl mostly searched for treasure at the site. The initial digs are now considered a travesty, done haphazardly and with zero responsibility. The workers weren't trained, and nobody really cared about the longevity of the site. Instead, all they cared about was finding gold and treasure for the king. This poor style of archaeology went on for 100 years. The military had access to the site for 15 years, but then the place was picked over by tomb raiders. Finally, in 1860, Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli took over as director of excavations, and only then were areas cleared and meticulously documented. For a few decades, the archaeological investigations at Pompeii went by swimmingly. The ancient city was divided into 9 regions. Every door on every street was given a number, and each house was labeled. Giuseppe even developed a special technique to make casts out of the disintegrated bodies of those who died 2,000 years ago. Individuals who were hit by the volcanic ash when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD left hollow pits, imprints where their bodies disintegrated, and it was Giuseppe who figured out how to preserve these imprints to make full-body casts of the dead. Work was interrupted at Pompeii with the outbreak of World War II, but things picked up again in 1951, and since then, excavations at the site have been ongoing. Have you ever visited Pompeii? It's definitely on my bucket list. Let me know in the comments. And now for number 9. But first, it's shout-out time. I want to give a big thank you to Bart Fury and Michelle Birch for supporting this channel. Thanks, guys! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries. We'd love to have you. Number 9. The Army's own T-Rex. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has their very own complete skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus rex. It's all because of a massive flood that unearthed an unprecedented number of dinosaur bones in 1993 in Coralville, Iowa. The town experienced a devastating 28 days of relentless rain. Over 17,000 cubic feet of water flooded the state, wiping out almost in entirety the state's yearly crop of corn and soybeans. And you know how important corn is in Iowa. People's lives were uprooted and houses and other structures were destroyed. And in the end, the city nearly went out in the same way Atlantis did. Once the rain finally stopped, the Army Corps came in to assess the damage, but what they discovered shocked the entire world. The floods had eroded a whopping 5 feet of solid limestone near the Coralville Dam that was built in the 1950s. The erosion formed a gorge, and all along its bottom were the shining fossils of dinosaurs and other long-forgotten beasts. The flooding revealed one of the most impressive fossil beds in the world, and the remains of creatures here date back an impressive 375 million years. Most of the fossils were marine creatures, things that lived when Iowa was an ocean, and because it was the U.S. Army that discovered them, all the ancient marine creatures belonged to them. But instead of building their own theme park to make some cash from the discovery, they teamed up with paleontologists. One of the survey archaeologists for the Corps, Nancy Brighton, said their collection spans almost the full paleontological record. Everything from plants to animals that existed prior to humans was unveiled by the flooding. But here's what's crazy. This isn't the only dinosaur gold mine owned by the U.S. Army. They manage over 8 million acres of land across the continental United States, and they find dinosaur bones all the time. Not just Army personnel, but ordinary people hiking through Army-owned land. In 1988, Kathy Wankel was trekking through Montana's Fort Peck Reservoir when she noticed what looked like a shoulder blade pushing through the soil. The lighting was so perfect she could see the pattern of bone marrow. This bone turned out to be the remains of a T-Rex that lived in Montana 66 million years ago. Because the army owned the land, they were the ones who dug out the T-Rex and claimed it for themselves. They now have their very own 38-foot T-Rex skeleton, and it's nearly 100% complete and weighs 6 tons. You can see it for yourself at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, where the Army agreed to put it on display for 50 years. Number 8. The Roswell video. There has been a video floating around on the internet since the days of dial-up that shows what could be an alien autopsy. The video was supposedly filmed in 1947. If that year rings a bell, it's because in July of 1947, the U.S. military allegedly discovered a crashed UFO in the New Mexico desert near Roswell. It was the biggest potential UFO incident to date and still has conspiracy theorists frothing at the mouth. It's not that there haven't been other UFO sightings or potential crashes, but this is one of the most, if not the most, well-known crash landing of an extraterrestrial vessel. What makes Roswell special is that the Army basically admitted to what really happened, and the video has been around for a long time, long enough that some wonder if it isn't real leaked footage taken after the crash. William Woody lived near Roswell in the 1940s. He was there on the night of July 4th when a brilliantly illuminated object smashed into the ground. Shortly after, rancher McBrazel found a mysterious wreckage on his property in Lincoln County, 75 miles from Roswell. All he was able to identify were pieces of rubber and what looked like tinfoil. He went immediately to Sheriff George Wilcox to report the discovery, who got into contact with Colonel William Blanchard, the commanding officer at the Roswell Army Airfield. The next day, the Roswell Army Airfield released a statement saying the rumors of a flying disc were real. They really did release a statement saying they gained possession of a flying saucer thanks to the cooperation of local sheriffs and ranchers. Then the Army went out and collected everything from the site before taking it back to their base. But what's strange is that after the fact, the government changed their narrative. They quickly reversed everything they said about a flying saucer, blaming the crash on a weather balloon instead. Then they released photographs of the alleged weather balloon as proof. But if that's true, why in the world did they originally claim they found a flying saucer? It seems like they admitted to what they found, then quickly reversed course when the higher-ups told them to cover it up. We will likely never know the truth of what happened at Roswell. The video that's been around for decades shows the bodies of creatures that do look like aliens, but nobody has ever been able to certify it as real evidence of an extraterrestrial crash. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Number 7. Cracking ice. In the 1960s, the U.S. Army initiated Project Iceworm. They wanted to see if they could construct a nuclear facility underneath a mile of solid Greenland ice. But it was a bold project with devastating consequences. By the end of the project, the Army had learned just how fragile ice really is. They discovered the hard way that building an ice base like some kind of James Bond villain isn't a practical idea. But let's go back to when all of this began during the Cold War. The U.S. was acutely aware of the nuclear threat posed by Russia. They needed to be ahead of the curve and were willing to take on any project that could put them in an advantageous position. One great idea was proposed to construct a nuclear weapons facility in Greenland that could easily strike at Russia. Construction then began in 1960 with approval from the Danish government. It was to be a megalithic military facility hidden beneath the ice in northern Greenland. This secret ice base was called Camp Century. The idea was to establish a fully functioning base like you might find hidden inside a mountain somewhere. They planned to build tunnels through the ice that could launch nuclear ballistic missiles. The whole point was to be sneaky and to launch missiles that the Soviets couldn't defend against. They wanted to do it with lightning speed before the Soviets realized what was happening. However, the average temperature during construction was around 10 degrees Fahrenheit, but it could get as low as minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. By 1963, scientists were facing a harsh reality. They eventually came to the conclusion that you cannot launch nuclear missiles from underneath a mile of ice. ice. They discovered just how unstable an ice sheet can be. They took ice core samples that revealed the ice to be moving so rapidly that any installation would fall apart in just a few years. The facility was ultimately abandoned in 1965, but it was a good learning exercise for the U.S. Army. Thanks to the failed project, scientists now know that even without human-caused global warming, Greenland's ice sheet is still melting. Number 6. The lost settlements of Campania. Italy has been home to various groups of humans since prehistory. The lands of Campania, hidden in the shadows of Mount Vesuvius, were particularly popular with the ancients. The volcanic soil has always made for excellent crops, which is one of the reasons people have been attracted there throughout the centuries. In the 1990s, workers began to clear land in the small town of Ricignano d'Aversa so they could build a new U.S. naval support site. But work came to a screeching halt when the excavators suddenly revealed ancient artifacts in the volcanic ground. Underneath the future naval site were the forgotten remains of villages and tombs from 4,000 years ago. Everyone who has ever lived near Mount Vesuvius has been doomed. It's honestly the worst possible place to build a city in Italy. The Bronze Age villages of 1780 BC fared even worse than the citizens of Pompeii. Scientists call it the Pompeii d'Avellino eruption, which deposited a phenomenal amount of ash over a dozen miles away. It's believed the eruption was far more violent than the one that destroyed Pompeii. It began slowly, then increased into disastrous pyroclastic explosions. People fled their villages, desperate to escape, but most of them died when they suffocated in the fallout. Then, after immense damage had already been done, the final blast occurred, like a nuclear explosion. However, evidence of this ancient catastrophe is scarce. In 2001, the construction of a supermarket revealed a Bronze Age village that was destroyed by the ancient eruption. Archaeologists identified ash that fell onto a farm as its occupants tried to flee with their cows. The story from the construction of the naval base in the 1990s is similar. About 300 acres of land were developed, with archaeologists identifying the ruins of houses, 92 graves, and an abundance of jewelry. Number 5. The destruction of Babylon. In 2009, UNESCO World Heritage officials voiced concerns that U.S. troops and contractors were at it again, damaging the ancient city of Babylon. They were caught driving heavy machinery over sacred paths that were thousands of years old. They completely bulldozed hilltops, and they also dug trenches in the ruins of the biblical city. The U.S. was using Babylon as a military base, resulting in destruction that's never been totally tallied. We don't know how much of Babylon was destroyed during the occupation, but researchers think it was significant. In 2006, the U.S. even admitted to causing massive damage to Babylon in 2003 and 2004. And by 2009, they were at it again. After 5,000 years, a huge amount of Babylon was left in ruins, and it's still in ruins to this day. Of course, the damage didn't start with the U.S. military. UNESCO officials were careful to say that many of Babylon's greatest treasures were lifted by archaeologists in the 19th century and sold across the globe. Saddam Hussein even built his own structures in the ancient city of Babylon during his rule. And when the Americans landed in 2003, looters returned to the city with a vengeance. The BBC reported that U.S. Marines used the ruins of the city as a helicopter pad and even filled sandbags with chunks of the city itself. We have no idea what kind of archaeological discoveries may have been made by accident, as soldiers dug deep trenches alongside walls that stood during the days of King Nebuchadnezzar II from 600 BC. But considering the timing and how old Babylon is, it's probably fair to say that the city has been looted more than once over the thousands of years. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Number 4. Lost Empires. Spy satellites have been revealing the lost empires of Afghanistan for years. Afghanistan is one of the oldest places in the world, with some of the deepest secrets and most mysterious lost civilizations. But for archaeologists, it's a massive headache. Afghanistan has been largely off limits for any kind of archaeological fieldwork for years. Between ISIS, the Taliban, and civil anarchy, it's been deemed too dangerous for scientists to be rooting through ancient ruins. But now, researchers are finding thousands of ancient sites across the country that have never been documented before. The discoveries are groundbreaking, to say the least, and archaeologists are drooling over a potential future in which they can finally explore these places. It's all thanks to spy satellites and funding from the U.S. Department of State. Archaeologists were granted permission to look through commercial satellite data, military drone images, and U.S. spy satellites. These images are of the highest quality and offer a bird's-eye view of places that are otherwise impossible to see. At a recent meeting of the American Schools of Oriental Research, scientists said they tripled their published archaeological features in Afghanistan. They've discovered massive complexes that once housed travelers moving along the Silk Road, and they even found ruins from the early centuries before Christ. David Thomas, a respected archaeologist from La Trobe University in Melbourne, says he expects tens of thousands of sites to be discovered. This could be an exaggeration, but it might not be. Satellites and remote sensing technologies are changing the face of archaeology, and seeing how big and unexplored Afghanistan is, there could be a whole world waiting to be found. It's just a shame that the team won't be able to physically go out in the desert to excavate the sites. So far, the team has identified 119 massive complexes from between the 16th and 17th centuries. These were outposts situated deep in Afghanistan's sweltering hot deserts. Each one is located just a few miles from the other, equal to about a full day's journey. They were outposts made of mud brick buildings where caravans could rest as they journeyed across the desert. They were all about the size of a football field and had enough space for caravans, camels, and desert merchants. These were very popular places hundreds of years ago. Number 3. Roman necropolis. In the 1880s, military engineer and geologist Carlos Ribeiro accidentally discovered an ancient archaeological site in Portugal. The military engineer stumbled upon the site of Colaride, a place that dates back to the Middle Paleolithic period, which is a fancy name for the Stone Age. The site he discovered was found to be inhabited by people as early as 35,000 years ago. The original excavations by Carlos revealed flint instruments used by prehistoric humans as primitive tools. It was clear that in this natural cave, people once broke apart rocks to use as everything from weapons to kitchen utensils. Then, in 1898, agricultural workers discovered a Roman necropolis at the entrance to the natural grotto where the prehistoric tools were found. By this time, archaeologists were starting to get excited about the site. It was prospected by British naturalists who found human remains and an ancient gold ring from the days of the Roman Empire. The tombs were likely created about 2,000 years ago. Archaeologists also found Roman construction materials, which led to the suggestion that Colaride was a functioning settlement. In the 1990s, over 100 years after the military found the site, archaeologists identified a rock quarry. This was a place where Romans broke apart natural stones to use in buildings throughout the empire. It's likely the entire area was a bustling industrial hub, and the necropolis was where they buried their dead. But at some point, it was abandoned, and all traces of human habitation were lost. And now, all that remains is a ruined quarry and a few traces of what may have been a villa. What we have here is a history stretching from the days of cave-dwelling Homo sapiens to monument-building Romans. And yet, there is very little interest in the site today. Number 2. The Chupacabra. Is it possible that the Chupacabra was a military experiment gone wrong? The answer is a resounding maybe. The Chupacabra is a mythical cryptid whose tales have made it around the globe and infected the imagination of the public. Some believe it's a kind of mangy, werewolf-like creature, while others say it's a blood-sucking alien. Its name translates to goat sucker in Spanish, and it earned its name because the initial reports were in Puerto Rico, with people claiming to have witnessed a freakish beast sucking the blood from live goats. This ugly animal vampire was first seen in 1975. There were a series of livestock killings in Puerto Rico that locals attributed to a monster. People witnessed some kind of dog-like creature lumbering around on 4 legs. Ranchers claimed their goats were being completely drained of blood, and some even reported hearing shrieks at night and the flapping of giant wings. Some suspected a satanic cult, and others believed it was a demon from hell. One of the biggest issues with Chupacabra sightings is that they are always different. Some eyewitnesses say the creature looks like a lizard, but other accounts claim that it resembles a tiny bear covered in dark fur. Some say it has round eyes that glow red in the darkness, and other people believe it hops around like a kangaroo and has porcupine quills on its back. The only common denominator throughout the years has been that the Chupacabra drinks blood and shrieks like a banshee. It was in 1995 that the Chupacabra legend reached its height, when 8 sheep were discovered dead with puncture wounds on their chests. Nobody ever learned how it happened, but after the Chupacabra hysteria died off, things kind of calmed down. There have been sightings all the way from Puerto Rico to Mexico, and there have even been accounts of the beast in South America, but nobody has ever found direct evidence of a Chupacabra. And you may be wondering, what does this all have to do with the military? The US has had a heavy presence in Puerto Rico since the 1930s. There are bases on the island used as research and development facilities. Many of the projects that go on here are highly classified, and so people think they could be experimenting with animals, and that the Chupacabra was a genetic experiment that escaped. But of course, take these rumors with a grain of salt. People also believe the US bases in Puerto Rico are used for cloning experiments and for keeping dead alien bodies. Number 1. The military archaeologist. The Pitt Rivers Museum at the University of Oxford has over 500,000 objects in their collection. But it all began with just one special gift from a military officer who turned into an archaeologist. His name was Augustus Henry Lane Fox, and he served for over 3 decades in the British Army. He was part of the Grenadier Guards and even fought during the Crimean War at the Battle of Alma in September 1854. He retired after many acts of valor, then turned his interest to archaeology. He already had a passion for archaeology because of his time overseas. With his knowledge of foreign culture and his experience in the military, he started to collect artifacts, and some of the artifacts even came from his own property. He knew a lot about the history of the Romans and the Saxons in Britain, and spent 17 years excavating his own land. He also changed his name from Lane Fox to Pitt Rivers. By the time he died in 1900 at the age of 73, Augustus had donated a whopping 22,000 artifacts to the Pitt River Museum. Because of his hard work, the museum was able to open its doors. Without him, it likely wouldn't even exist today. Thanks for watching! Do you believe the Chupacabra was a military experiment? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye!